Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. We're excited to join you today with a fantastic guest. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm just one of your co-hosts. I'm here with my friends, my colleagues, my co-hosts, Patsy Feeman and Leb Tannenbaum. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to have you both. Today, as I said, we are all excited. Listener, we are all excited to welcome back to the Frustrated CEO podcast, the first three-time guest. At the time we had him on the second time, he was our first two-time guest. We're now welcoming back three-time guest, Ben Pring. Now, Ben is a widely recognized IT futurist, author, and professional thought leader with a storied track record analyzing the cutting edge of business and technology, including the emergence and growth of cloud computing, AI, software engineering, and labor arbitrage. You've seen Ben in the Harvard Business Review, in the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, London Times, and a host of other go-to publications for business leaders. Ben's trophy case at home has a Gartner Thought Leader Award, a top award from Thinkers 50, and recognition as one of the top 10 leading influencers on the future of work. Unlike my trophy case at home, which just has a participation trophy from when I was on the high school bowling team. Collecting dust, no less. Ben has authored several award-winning books, which are on the topic of AI, which I know is going to be a topic of our show today. So for now, Ben Pring, welcome back to the Frustrated CEO podcast.
Thank you, Patrick. It's great to be back, and thank you for inviting me back again. And hi, Patsy and Leb.
Hey there.
Happy to have you.
Yeah, I think we talked about this the first time, making it an annual thing, and it's been almost. So actually, I think that's where I want to start, Ben. When we first had you on, episode 10, for the listener who isn't caught up on those, go back and check out Ben's first two episodes. Episode 10 was back in August of 2021. We were just still in the early months of the pandemic. And then episode 42, when we had you on the second time, was in December of 2023. And that was a little bit more towards the latter stages of the pandemic, when companies were grappling with whether and how to bring employees back into the office. We talked a lot about that in those prior episodes. When it comes to hybrid and remote work, from your perspective, has the dust settled? Like it's figured out? Leaders pretty much know what it's going to be? Or do you think there's still a lot of change to be made?
Yeah, no, it's a great place to start this conversation, Patrick, because I think that is still a work in progress. I don't think that's particularly settled. I think the new norm, if you like, hasn't really established itself, and you can see different schools of opinion, different thoughts sort of still playing their way out. There's a kind of, I suppose, three camps. There's a full return to office camp. There's a full remote, just, do whatever you want kind of model. And then this hybrid in the middle. And I suppose most organizations are in a way in some form of that hybrid at the moment. That's very common. But obviously, I think what's become more material and more apparent is that there's a schism, if you like, or a difference between the corporate view of this, which is very much influenced by their real estate issues, and then the more employee view of this, and more about work-life balance, about attracting the best talent, being a sort of employer of choice for them, and a reality that a lot of people have experienced. And is frequently commented on that, well, I go back to the office, but my team's in India or my team's in California. So why am I, sitting on a Zoom in the office when I could be sitting on a Zoom just at home and talking to those people? I think we've been through the cycle of that, of people going back to the office and realizing, well, it doesn't really make much point being in the office because your team's not there, and it's not much culture there anyway. The fabled sort of corporate company culture isn't much culture at all. So I think that real estate issue is a very, very, very real one, and for people who are kind of following the the commercial real estate world at the moment, you can see prices, valuations, just the air continues to go out of that wheel, and that's a very difficult place. And I think we're still working through commercially the implications of that, let alone all of the downstream derivatives of that, including tax collection for cities and what that does to cities, and that's a very, very complicated issue. But I think that hybrid thing, which has been, I suppose, in the last year or so, become more the default. Certainly, lots of younger people that I know, like my daughter who's working in London, friends of hers, it's a 2-day in the office kind of model, 3 days at home, 2 days in the office model. I think that's quite common, whether it's 2 days, whether it's 3 days. I certainly notice when I drive where I live, about an hour south of Boston, up to Boston, if I go on a Monday or a Friday, it's a much easier commute than on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So I think that's become the default, that people kind of work at home, go to the golf course on a Monday or a Friday, and then the work sort of compressed into the 3 days in the middle. You may have seen Bernie Sanders yesterday putting a proposal onto the floor of the House to codify an official 4-day working week.
Right.
I don't think there's going to be much chance of that passing and becoming a sort of federal mandated law. But again, it shows to you that this discussion is quite rich and hot still. And the dust still, hasn't really settled on what this new norm is for the next, 30, 40 years.
Ben, do you have any insight into how this might play out in geopolitically, or in different countries, like India seems to be rising, that it might impact the formula, so to speak, about hybrid as opposed to all remote?
No, that's an interesting take on it, Leb. Certainly, India was very challenged by in the immediate sort of panic, if you like, of March. What is it now? March 2000, when we realized that this was a big deal and we were going to have to sort of lock down. India was very challenged because most of that Indian technology workforce supporting American businesses, European businesses, that model, as it had grown over the last 30 years, was very much an in-office model. And a lot of those young Indian IT workers didn't really have the domestic infrastructure to work from home. And I was when we first probably talked, I was in Cognizant at that time, and it was a big, very heavy lift for Cognizant and all of the Indian-based providers at the time to get, a laptop to an employee, and then the security infrastructure for that employee to work at home. A lot of those young people, working in apartments which, that weren't set up to be not, big suburban houses like we all have as older people, sort of where we have an office, a room in the house where we can easily work. So that was a big deal. India has pivoted back into a in-person, in-office model, very, very, very much more than Europe and America. And I think the same is true in China as well. The sort of bourgeois, white-collar, office-based, computer-based work is very much back in the office. I think the interesting currents underneath that question that you're asking, Lev, which is an interesting one, is that I think this whole experience of the last 4 years certainly seems to have done something to the psychology of the notion of work. People seem to have a different approach to work, a different relationship with work, and there seems to be much more of an assertive position from younger people that work isn't the be-all and end-all of their lives, in a way perhaps that their parents the previous generation sort of thought about work. There's this whole notion of the kind of work to live model rather than live to work model, and that's important because that does have geopolitical overtones, because at the end of the day, work-life balance notwithstanding, mental health challenges notwithstanding, as somebody famously once said, the facts of life are conservative, whether one likes that or not. The truth is that working hard, being very focused, very committed to work is a completely integral element to you personally, societally, nationally, you competing in a global, very competitive environment. And if you follow the logic of what I'm sort of laying out there, the breadcrumbs of what I'm laying out there is that, America, the West, has much more competition than it's ever had before, particularly from China, particularly from rising nations like India. And if the societal, cultural attitudes around work are, we've kind of, we're overwork. We don't want to work as hard. We just want to be, on social media and having a good time. And that has implications, I think. It's obviously a complicated discussion and a nuanced discussion, and I'm loath to kind of stereotype and put things in black and white. But I do think, in the way you frame that question, it is interesting that America, which is obviously historically in the last 100 and 150 years, work has been the key to America's rise, and people came to America for jobs, for work. They were entrepreneurial people. I mean, that was, again, a sort of cliche, but the entrepreneurial people came from Europe and elsewhere to America. If that's weakening, if that culture is weakening, that does have geopolitical implications, which will play out over a long period of time. But I think, you're nudging up against something that is important there.
Thank you, Ben.
And I'm curious on that same topic. If we focus just on the American workforce, what implications is it having for the workforce?
Yeah, exactly. I think that this is, again, this sort of interesting thing that's bubbling up under the surface. We have that part of the discussion. We now have, and again, I hear this from my own kids, my own, both in their early 20s. They're very conscious of the rise of AI. They're very conscious that they're going to be competing with the robots, and you've got to, I suppose, have a little bit of empathy for them, because that is going to become tougher and tougher. And Thomas Friedman's talked about this with the rise of India, that it was the death of average. The average person was going to find it harder and harder to compete with the exceptional person from India or the exceptional person from the Philippines. Now, fast forward 20 years, and now we're all going to be competing with incredible machinery and incredible software. And of course, as people famously saying at the moment, it's a nice way of putting it, that, you're not going to lose your job to a piece of AI, an AI robot, but you might lose your job to somebody using AI or somebody using a robot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sense for young people entering the workplace, the workforce, trying to make the way on their journey, on their ladder, I can feel and I can read and sense that there's existential despair would be too strong way of putting it, but there is a sense that, this is getting tougher and tougher. Rents are going up through the roof. Inflation has made food and eating out 30% more expensive than it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It would be only human if it, you became, oh God, do I really want to play this game anymore? And maybe I'll just disappear into this world. And so again, I don't want to sort of over-index on that but I do think there is something in that, because it is going to be there's going to be incredible opportunity with these tools, and the means of production are literally in our hands, in a Marxist way. But it is going to be tougher, and I think that workforce issue, these cultural issues, and then again, as Loeb says, in a sort of geopolitical way, I mean, the competitive strength of nations. Porter, that's a famous book from a long time ago. But yeah, that's what's going to play out, and that's kind of what's fascinating. Putin said a couple of years ago, whoever controls AI is going to control the world.
Ben, you used the phrase existential crisis, and that was on my mind as I was preparing for today. You've used that phrase in other, in our prior episodes, specifically when we were talking about attracting and retaining the younger talent, the high tech, right? That this is an existential crisis to businesses today. If you can't figure out how to attract and retain the young people, now add in what you were just talking about, that there's the psychology of work. The young high tech Gen Z isn't necessarily looking to make their purpose work, right? They want that work-life balance. So that becomes harder for the business potentially harder for the business to attract. And then I think about AI. I was going to ask you, are you seeing, is the lure of taking matters into my own hands, developing my own app, developing my own AI solution to whatever the problem is that I see, is that drawing the younger talent away from the corporate world, the big businesses? So how do you continue, speaking to our CEO listener, how do you continue to attract and retain the younger high-tech talent that may not necessarily want to work as hard?
Yes.
And may not even necessarily see that as their path to staying relevant and putting food on the table, keeping up with the prices?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Patrick, and the way you framed it is really good. And no, it's a very complicated issue, very complicated. And I think, again, the traditional model, if you like, of a senior leader trying to think about these sorts of issues, the traditional model, sticks and carrots, I'm not sure that works quite as in the way it historically has done. The beatings will continue until morale improves. That old one. I'm not sure too many people are kind of interested in that so much anymore nowadays. And I think, again, thinking about the tech talent that you need in your organization, they really do have more choice than ever before. Slow down, risks notwithstanding. There's a lot of talk in the Valley about that at the moment. There was obviously a lot of overhiring during the COVID sort of era. And there's been a lot of riffing in the last 18 months. And I think that's stabilized a little bit. I think some of that, we may have talked about this before, some of that was somewhat coordinated, I think. This is my suspicion, my conspiracy theory suspicion. It was sort of coordinated by some of the big tech companies to try and take some steam out of the system, to change the narrative, because there was a lot of wage inflation coming through the system at that time. But that recalibration notwithstanding, tech talent has more opportunity than ever before, not just in the tech industry itself, but in banking and healthcare and public service, all sectors of the economy. And so getting those people in, getting them motivated, getting them wanting to, not only be in the office, but, literally, working for you full time. Yeah, that continues to be a challenge. And I think it continues to be a challenge for the tech-centric companies, but it continues to be an even bigger challenge, as we've talked about, for the companies who are trying to sort of catch up in tech, trying to bring, techie people into a non-techie culture continues to be very challenging. And the HR, the management issues around that continue to be an issue. But I do think what's really interesting is that in the tech world, certainly, and this next wave of younger people who have been through a formal college, or just sort of DIY'd it themselves through YouTube or Udacity that Accenture bought last week for $1 billion. Those people, I think, again, this is where this sort of social contract has sort of broken down a little bit. The social contract between the employer, the employee. It's been breaking down clearly for a long period of time, but it's in pretty bad repair at the moment. That's where these people are thinking this is the means of reduction. I can do incredible things at the moment, and this is the explosion that we're seeing, the sort of Cambrian explosion that we're seeing around using AI, machine learning, data, all these different tools to do things in a small startup that never would have been possible before. There was a lot of chatter online in the last 24 hours in tech circles about the thought that within the next few years, we're going to see the first $1 billion company with one employee. So that's an interesting idea. But the other, just to sort of peel the onion and go down the existential rabbit hole a little bit, the other thing that's very a live wire in engineering circles, tech engineering circles, and I've never seen hardcore techies quite as freaked out as is happening in sort of all the platforms where people talk about this sort of stuff, is that people can realize that this phrase that many of your listeners and viewers will have used themselves or heard people use over the last few years, that software's eating the world. Software is now beginning to eat software. Software is beginning to write software. And so we've been pushing all these kids for the last generation into STEM, into tech skills, coding skills. And now a lot of those guys and gals are going, oh my God, is there a 40-year career in this industry at all? Because this software is moving so fast. Am I going to be able to monetize this? Am I going to be able to pay for a house, pay for college, fund my 401k in this industry? Or is this industry going to collapse itself within the course of the next 40 years? And nobody has an answer to that. But again, I think this speaks to these thoughts that a lot of people are having, that the world is changing faster and faster. Some people are freaking out. Some people are blasé. Some people are just mildly unsettled. But again, I think that's very real, and relating, sort of trying to tie all the conversation we've had so far together. I think that's sort of, in a way, this weird psychological moment we're at, where a CEO or a CIO or senior leaders need to be, I'm sure are, very sensitive to these types of things, but leading, which requires confidence and conviction above all other things, sort of becomes harder, because who really knows?
So on that point, you've talked a lot about AI and the impact of AI and how that's changing, and as yet who knows how it's all going to settle. There's also the people or the human component in here.
Yeah.
And there's some things, hopefully, that AI is not going to be able to duplicate, at least not yet.
Yeah.
And so as a CEO, knowing you've got people that either come into the office once or twice a week, or you don't ever see them for a year, whatever that is, what do people need now from CEOs, from CIOs that is different than, this carrot, stick and carrot approach, which.
Yeah. This is so interesting, I think, Patsy, that you may have seen the author Yuval Noah Harari. Who's quite well known, was on the Stephen Colbert show the other evening. People may have seen this. And one of the things he was talking about was that this is the first time in human history where we don't really know what to teach the next generation, because things are changing so quickly that, again, this idea, well, can I monetize something for 40 years? We don't really know how fast this is going to change and how people are going to monetize skills. How are you going to make a bourgeois living? And I think, and that's a great question, and it frames again these issues in a very sort of nice provocative question on thought. But the thing that I think is the answer to that question, and I've been saying this for a while, and I don't know, and I'm conscious of this being the hope is the father to the thought, you know, that phrase, that maybe this is wishful thinking. But the answer to this question really is that we have a renaissance, or I know Americans say that a different way. I can never say it the American way. A renaissance? Is that the way?
It's close. It's good enough. Yeah.
Let me say it my English way. We have a renaissance. Human characteristics and qualities and skills that I think in my working year, in my working lifetime, I've seen degrade, get worse and worse and worse and worse. If you think back to one of the things that attracted me to come and live in America 25 years ago was customer service. You know, you went to a restaurant, people were friendly and nice. You went into a store, people were friendly and nice in a way that they weren't in London, where I came from. I've seen that. I don't know if you guys agree with me, but I just see that's collapsed in America. You go into a store nowadays, nobody looks you in the eye. The young people, they don't even say, that'll be $16.78, please. They might not even, do you know what I mean?
Yes.
We've lost human characteristics, human qualities, human skills. We've not taught those things. We've indexed on very, very sort of commercial, very, very short-term financial metrics. We've brought up a generation of kids looking at this and not looking up. And I think that this technology may force us to reassess that and realize that you probably don't want to go to see a robot doctor. And you probably don't want your kids to be taught by a robot teacher. You want your kids to be taught by humans, people, giving your kids a human experience, using technology to make that better. But you want the human interface. And I always sort of think that if the robots are going to come along and do all the work, if you're going to go to a $1,000 an hour lawyer, and you know that really the software on the machine is doing all the work, that lawyer better give you a bloody good meeting. Maybe we're going to see a renaissance of the 3 martini lunch, because that's the human experience that you're paying for. The machine is doing all the work. What's going to be the value of the human? It's going to be the human layer interface between you and the machine. And I think if you follow that logic through, and if it doesn't sound too sort of ridiculous and silly and outlandish, it means that we have incredible opportunity to upskill humans on human qualities again. It's a bit like in the 1950s and 60s, posh young ladies would go to Switzerland to a finishing school to learn manners. Maybe we need to expand that idea so we all learn human manners again, to be the human interface. Because I've said for a while, the way to beat the robots is not to be a bad robot. And make that, and bring this sort of some of those fuzzy thoughts into a bit more of a kind of business context and a bit more of a real context that hopefully people will sort of recognize. If you again go into I won't mention any brand names because they'll probably come after me and sue me, but if you go into a pharmacy in a main street in any American town, and you go in, let's forget about the ones where they're locking everything down because of shoplifting, but just a regular one, and you want to ask somebody, where's this brand of toothpaste or whatever, you can't find anybody working in there. There's nobody working in there. The only person that's working there, probably one person on the checkout on the till, and they're not going to help you. You walk over there, you've got to walk back. So what's happened in that environment is that the human experience is degraded, and there are hardly any humans working in that environment nowadays. Contrast that with, you go into the Apple store, loads of people, humans working there. And you go in and they're friendly and they smile and, hi, how are you? And they ask you, how can I help you? And there's the Genius bar, and it's a totally different experience, that Apple store from that pharmacy. And one of the reasons why is because in the Apple store, they've automated away all of the transactional elements of the work.
Yeah.
And they use the humans for the human interface layer. Whereas in the pharmacy, they haven't automated away all the transactional elements. The people are still doing the transactional elements of the process. And so that's, in a way, to me, a sort of answer to this question of how do humans and machines, software relate, is that if you can automate away the boring bits, the transactional bits, then you free up again, and you need that human interface layer to provide the relationship, the value, the experience that we as humans want. And so it's a long-winded way of sort of trying to offer some hope that perhaps the irony in all of this and the paradox of all of this, in a best case scenario, is that the machines actually free us from the boring bits, and they allow us to do the more interesting bits. But to do the more interesting bits and to monetize those at a personal level, you have to have those skills, you have to have that ability. And I think we've forgotten that all needs learning, that all needs training. And bring that into a business context, somebody at 18 or 21, they're still very imperfect in many aspects of that. And so, again, there's a tremendous opportunity for HR departments, enlightened, progressive leadership to say, let's make our people the best humans we can. And that's how we're going to differentiate ourselves over our competition, rather than just thinking we're going to have, a better SAP installation than our competition.
Ben, that actually reminds me of an article I just read the other day about how people are flocking away from the technology of like the Instacart kind of online shopping, where I can go online from my home and I can put in my order.
Yeah.
And it would either be available for pickup or it would be delivered. But the reason they're not flocking away from it because the technology is bad. They're flocking away from it because the person who is fulfilling the order is not fulfilling it properly, right?
Yeah.
So like they're not combing the shelves looking for exactly the thing that I ordered, or they're making it really difficult. They're making their own substitutions for something that they don't, whereas I can go to the store and I can see, no, what I wanted is exactly there. But so it's that piece.
I think that the notion of that sort of we've talked a lot again, and lots of businesses and lots of different contexts have talked about the experience economy for a long period of time, but we all know that the experiences many of us have in many different scenarios in our day-to-day life are still very suboptimal. At an extreme, going to the DMV to renew your driver's license, that's a completely suboptimal experience.
Right.
Let alone going into a high-end retailer or a high-end supermarket. So I think there's a lot of potential for this still. And as I say, I don't know whether I'm just being Panglossian here and sort of overly optimistic about it, but I think a world in which we just automate everything down to the bare bones, in which we all live in this very, very transactional, software-mediated environment where we go out into the real world and it's just some dystopian, sort of setup. I don't know. I think a lot of people, even though they love tech like me, don't want to live in that world. That's not
Right.
that's not what tech evangelists like me were propagating or evangelizing or thinking about when we said, this is cool and you should do more with it.
Ben, I have a riff off of that. So I lived in Portland for a really long time, Portland, Oregon. So, relatively large city. Before that, I grew up around New York City. And when you talk about the experience we have, let's say going into a store, what I'm starting to see, and I'm interested if this is verifiable through your knowledge, is that people are migrating out of cities. And the experience that I get shopping here on the Oregon coast in smaller communities is actually good, friendly, social, and people act like they know you. And people who you don't know still wave when the car goes by. People are still waving at you. And it's so refreshing. And what I'm seeing living on the coast is that more and more people are leaving the city to come to smaller communities. And I'm wondering if that might be a trend all over the world because we long to connect socially.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think, again, this tends to ebb and flow, doesn't it? There tends to be different cycles of urbanization and suburbanization. And I think certainly up until the COVID moment, there was definitely a momentum for big organizations to be downtown again. To kind of leverage this next generation, younger people, tech people who wanted to be in the city, who didn't want to be out in the sort of office park out in the suburbs, perhaps near where they grew up. That was very noticeable. And again, in my world, in the tech consulting world, all the big tech consulting companies were sort of reinvesting in real estate downtown. Obviously, the whole WeWork phenomenon was a manifestation of that as well. But post-COVID, I think that pendulum has swung in the way that you're talking about, Lev, and the downtown environment has again degraded, and there's societal issues, probably outside of the purview of this conversation that are part of that as well. But no, this notion of humanity, of wanting a human experience, even in a very technology-mediated age that we live in, I think that just speaks to sort of enduring human qualities, characteristics, needs, wants, desires that, even if we lived in the most sci-fi future, we'll still need. I think people there's certainly more attention in the media again now bubbling up about the fact that younger people are realizing that this sort of the addiction that they have to this thing, the downsides of that addiction. Obviously, I sort of wrote a book about this quite 4 years ago, and more and more people, I think, are sort of grokking with that now, that this is just sort of sucking the life out of me. And again, I think look at attendance at shows, concerts, sports events. People want, the real thing. They want to be there. They want to experience it. Look at Expedia's current TV advertising. Nothing beats being there. That's their strapline. And I don't think that goes away. And again, I think the people in a commercial context, the businesses and the leaders of businesses that can surf that wave, leverage that momentum, leverage that demand, if you like, in an economic context, that to me is a smart bet to be making, rather than just thinking, oh, we're going to make everything as transactional, as online, as software driven as possible, and that's the route to the future. I'm not sure that's true.
Thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. Due to the length of our interview with Ben Pring, we're going to cut it here, and we're going to bring him back for part 2 of the conversation. Trust me, there's a lot of great information, so you're going to want to keep an eye out for that. In fact, if you'd like to automatically be notified for all future episodes, including part 2 of our conversation with Ben, then make sure you like and subscribe to the show in whatever podcast library you listen to. Now, if you didn't know, you could watch along with us, and that's on our new YouTube channel. Pull up YouTube, do a search for the Frustrated CEO podcast, and make sure you like and subscribe. And you'll be notified not only when Ben's part 2 interview drops, but for all future episodes. We're so grateful for your listenership, and we will see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.